say that they suffer from sort of a spiritual attention deficit disorder. They simply can't seem to stay tuned to what Jesus is trying to tell them. Like the dog in the animated movie Up, who is bopping along just fine until he sees a squirrel. You remember those scenes? Squirrel! Squirrel! The disciples have an uncanny ability to get distracted. Today's passage is a case in point. They're traveling through Galilee. Jesus is keeping everything on the down low because he's having some special time to teach his disciples. He doesn't want a lot of interruptions. He's got something important he needs to teach them. He's telling them a second time that he's going to suffer and die, and on the third day rise again. And the first time he said this, of course, was in the passage we read last week. It gave us Peter rebuking Jesus for talking like that, and Jesus chewing him out in front of the whole class, even calling him Satan. So you can forgive the disciples if, when Jesus predicts his passion and death and adds the words betrayal this time, they don't really want to ask him any questions about what he's just said. Mark puts it this way: the disciples did not understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him. Of course they were afraid to ask him. Maybe they were afraid to ask because they didn't want to be made an example of, as Peter had been. Maybe Jesus had neglected to begin that particular class the way some teachers do, trying to encourage engagement with the material by saying that there are no stupid questions. To which I think some students respond, "Oh yeah? You want to bet? I can come up with a stupid question." Or maybe, just maybe, they were afraid to ask because they were scared that they might really understand what he'd said. It might have some implications for them and for those who would follow after them. Regardless of the reason for their silence, not a single one of the 12 makes a peep. As they travel on, though, their conversations amongst themselves make it clear that the disciples have not really understood what Jesus has been talking about, because they start to argue amongst themselves about who is the greatest, who is the biggest success in life and faith. And Jesus overhears them and calls them out on it. "Hey guys, what were you arguing about on the way?" Well, they knew enough about what he'd been teaching them to be quiet when he asked them that. They knew that what they were doing did not line up with what he'd been telling them, so I can see them sort of hanging their heads in shame. Their spiritual attention deficit disorder had gotten the best of them again, and Jesus knew he had to do something to get their focus back on what he was all about. So after telling them, if you want to be truly great, you have to be a servant of all, and if you want to be first, you have to be last of all, Jesus did something that would have been very unusual in that day and age. He took a child. He put the child in the middle of them. He said, look, pay attention. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not just me, but the one who sent me. It's so easy to get distracted, isn't it? So easy to be lured away from what really matters in life and faith by the squirrels and the shiny objects, the cash and prizes, the desire to feel like we are secure or in control or somehow righter or better than someone else. It's just so darn easy to get distracted. I think one of the ways we get distracted is through modern technology. As wonderful as technology is to connect us to other human beings and to keep us abreast of what's happening in the larger world, as much fun as it is to be able to keep up with friends and loved ones all over the country and all over the globe, there are times and ways when technology pulls us away from real live opportunities to be present to whom and what is in front of us. You've all seen it, I'm sure. The family at the restaurant who are all sitting there looking at their phones. Or even sadder, the child who's trying to get their mom or dad's attention while the parent is locked in on checking email or the news or sports scenes. I've never been guilty of that. The way technology distances us from others, even as it connects us. so that people write and say things about others and to others on social media they would never say to each other face to face. So we need to be reminded through real live face-to-face conversations about what matters. Jesus put a child in the midst of the disciples. He was saying, this is a real live human being. This is what matters, not your arguments about who is the greatest, not your arguments about who is most right, not all the things that distract you, but this real, live, vulnerable human being. So don't let yourself get distracted. It's easy in our desire to feel comfortable to ignore or discount those who are really and truly weak and powerless. Those who are truly persecuted and under threat. So you have to understand that when Jesus put a child in the midst of those disciples, he and they weren't living in a culture that elevated children the way ours does. That culture treated children as sort of an afterthought, and many children didn't even make it to adulthood. I think about half didn't. It was not a culture that exalted children. But even living in a country and culture that adores children the way ours does, we know that too many children aren't adored. We know that too often they get abused and discarded because children have so little power comparatively. It's certainly the case, as I've said, that in Jesus' day and age, children had very little power. So we put a child among them and said, whoever welcomes one such child, one such vulnerable little one such powerless person in my name welcomes me. It's easy, so easy, to get distracted from that fundamental call to welcome the weak and the powerless. So easy to forget that the life of faith is not about what we get, but what we give. So easy to ignore that following Jesus is not about control and security, but about vulnerability and trust. So easy to discount the truth that we too, like the little one we baptized in the morning service, Leah Helen Martholio, who is Sally Casto's niece and Lee and Paulette Rainey's granddaughter, have been welcomed. Welcomed like a little child in our vulnerability. So it's a good thing we have baptisms as often as we do, as a way of putting our focus back on what's really important. Because when we baptize a child like we did little Leah this morning, it shakes us out of our spiritual attention deficit disorder and it focuses us for a time at least on what matters. Welcoming the vulnerable ones, embracing their vulnerability and ours, trusting in God's love for us before we were ever able to respond. Dedicating our lives to following the one who taught and keeps on teaching us to follow him in self-giving love. So a few thoughts as I close tonight. First, September is National Suicide Prevention Month. It's tough to mention that because it can feel like a trigger. But the alternative of not saying anything about it is not good either. Reason to draw our attention to this, because there are a host of people in the world and in some of our lives who struggle with thoughts of self-harm. Some of that's tied up in brain chemistry, of course, but I think from personal experience that what happens when people contemplate self-harm is that they have begun to utterly lose perspective. They've lost perspective on how precious they are to God and others, the impact that the loss of their life really would have. All of that tends to fade because the distractions of our culture's emphasis on success and beauty and wealth and achievement and getting into the right college or graduate school lead them to get caught up in feeling like somehow they're not good enough, or feeling like failing or letting people down is the end of the world, like losing a job is the end of the world, like not having a job to report to after they retire is the end of the world. Believing that they cannot appear vulnerable. They cannot seem to not have it all together. Second point. Three of the largest groups of people who take their own lives in our country are the following. One, military men and women who have come back from service. Two, people in the LGBTQ community. And three, white males in their 50s and 60s. That's an interesting group of different people. It's a little scary. What do we do about it? One thing I think we can do is keep on having baptisms. We keep on putting our focus back on what matters, which is human life and human connection and embracing vulnerability and the fact that we are adored and valuable not because of what we've done or not done, but because of who we are. We are all children of God. Maybe what needs to happen is for some groups of people to embrace the fact that they are vulnerable, and other groups of people to know that they are embraced in their vulnerability. That there's room for everyone if we will give each other room. Third point, about attention. What we focus on, a friend of mine used to say, grows. If we focus on what's positive, that grows. If we focus on what is negative, that grows. What we focus on grows. I know that many of you have probably heard this old Cherokee story before, but I'm going to tell it again. An old Cherokee elder is telling his grandson about life. He could have been teaching his granddaughter too. A fight is going on inside me, he tells the boy. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves. One is evil. He's anger and envy and sorrow and regret and greed and arrogance and self-pity and guilt and resentment and inferiority and lies and false pride and superiority and ego. He continued. The other is the good wolf. Is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside of you and inside of every other person too. Grandson thought about it for a minute. And then he asked his grandfather, Granddaddy, which wolf's going to win? The old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed. Matters which wolf you feed, because what we focus on grows. Number 4. Back to little Leah, who we baptized today, and she did great. She didn't make a peep until after she was done getting baptized. As she grows up, it's our duty, in addition to her family's duty, it's our duty and the larger church's duty to keep bringing her attention back to what really matters. Because the fact is, she'll probably have spiritual attention deficit disorder too, just like we do. So she'll need to keep on being reminded that she's a beloved child of God, even when she fails. She'll need to keep on being reminded of the fact that she matters to us and to God, no matter what her sexual orientation is. She'll need to keep on being reminded of the fact that she is called to live a life not just of vulnerability, but of embracing others in their vulnerability. So what are we going to do about our spiritual attention deficit disorder? I think over the years we might ask little Leah about that. In Jesus' name.